So thank you very much, everybody. So welcome to our session, one of our final sessions, called Great Offense is the Best Defense. You can tell that Von, our American leader, wrote that title, because it doesn't really translate to at least three of us on the panel. So let me just introduce the session and then I'll introduce the panel. This session is it's actually really close to my heart. It's kind of been very close to what I've been doing for the last kind of 10 years. You know, I believe passionately in both aspects of what we're about to talk about. So none of us started our businesses thinking, you know, of the worst case scenario. As solopreneurs, it's not really in our DNA. You know, we focus on the best possible outcome. You know, how much money are we going to make? What's the experience going to be like? You know, are the customers all going to love me? And, you know, have I got enough money to pay the bills and the taxes and everything like that? And, you know, always looking for like the next hustle and the next opportunity. We don't really often stop to think about what happens when. So what happens, you know, when my vehicle rolls over? What happens when somebody gets food poisoning? What happens when someone gets hit by a car? What happens when there's a fire on the premises? You know, these are all horrible things to think about, but we have to. As tour operators and you know, and even tour guides, even if you're working on somebody else's behalf, your tour operator better damn well make sure they're thinking about this. So we don't like to think about it, but it can absolutely make or break businesses when this stuff happens, because it does happen. Not so much this year, as we've had far less traveling than we would have liked, but in relatively normal years, it happens a lot. It happens all the time, happens all over the world. And companies, and even if you're an individual owner operator, or whether you're the biggest company in the world, if you don't react in the appropriate manner, if you don't react in the right way with the right method, then it can kill businesses. And it really has. There's several examples over the decades of businesses that have been they've had unrepairable damage to their reputation by simply the actions, or the lack of actions in some cases, that they've taken when this stuff's happened. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And we're going to talk about some of the prevention measures that we can take. So I'm just going to introduce the panel. So we have Andrew Cooper, first of all, who is based up near Aberdeen in Scotland, I believe. Is that right, Andrew?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us. So Andrew runs a consultancy company called Breakwater Consultancy. Have I got that name right?
You have, yeah.
Brilliant. Andrew, I'll let Andrew introduce himself in a bit, because I couldn't do justice to the experience that he's got. Andrew's going to go through a presentation for us in a moment, just very briefly about a very well used and very straightforward crisis management process. Next, we've got Mike Bowers, who is a health and safety travel consultant based in the US. Again, Mike has got a wealth of experience dealing with tour operators, putting health and safety processes in place, putting crisis processes in place, making sure that they've got all the necessary checks and balances in place before they operate. Is that about right, Mike?
Don't want to undersell you. Good summary. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thank you for being here. And last but by no means least, we've got Colin Mcgregor, who is from Tranquillico, and I can get that right because he's helpfully put it on the screen for me. So appreciate that, Colin. Colin and I go back about 10 years, around about that. And Colin has kind of worked as the kind of operations director and health and safety director for pretty much every large travel company that's ever been in existence in the UK. I think that's probably fair to say, over the last few decades. And now Colin runs a consultancy business helping small to medium operators deliver that health and safety preparedness and how to deal with crisis planning and prevention. So thank you, guys. I really appreciate you joining us. We've got about 45 minutes. We've got about another 40 minutes to go now, just over that. As ever, folks, if you for you watching, please put all your questions in the chat. We'll try and get to them as soon as we can. Probably towards the end, unless there's anything that needs kind of urgently clarifying. So to kick us off, I'm going to hand you over to Andrew, who can tell you just briefly about his experience. And Andrew's going to go through a crisis management procedure that we should all kind of write down and learn. And again, it's being recorded, so don't feel under pressure to make notes. So Andrew, over to you. You should be able to share your screen.
Yeah, sure. Quick introduction as I'm sharing my screen. So my background is originally with the British Army. I was a movement control officer. That's a bit like tour operations, but with really, really exciting excursions. I then worked for my local emergency services for a number of years, coordinating major incident plans. And the area I represent in the northeast of Scotland also covered all the North Sea oil platforms. So I flicked from there to the oil and gas industry. I've done a lot of emergency planning with them. And from there, with a transport background, I was head of crisis management for TUI for 3 years. I was brought in on the back end of the incident they had in Sousse and helped develop or redevelop all their crisis management plans. I'm now working for myself, got my own consultancy business. And the last few months, I've actually been working for my local health board. I've been working in the control room, helping with the COVID response up here in the northeast of Scotland. So, without further ado, a little bit about basic incident management. So, those of you who worked in big companies, this was probably quite a familiar picture to you. Lots of different plans, all linked to very similar risk and health and safety and incident management subjects. We're already getting some quite interesting lessons from the COVID response. In the UK, the Business Continuity Institute recently did a report which highlighted these points. And it's quite interesting and quite scary and quite sad at the same time that a lot of organizations didn't use a lot of their existing plans. They started with, this is different, immediately thought plans are too complicated, they weren't written for COVID, not widely understood, so we're going to do our own thing. And that's not unusual in some other incidents as well. And a key learning point was to try and make things simpler, make it easier understood, get it better embedded in companies. And to support that, I work with this basic incident management concept, which is one response plan, which links up risk management with any kind of disruption right through to crisis management, crisis communications. And it's based on the idea that you're either doing routine management, that's your standard operating procedures, or you're doing incident management. And this principle works for any size of organization, whether you're one person, whether you're 100 or 1,000 people, and any type of incident. And it's based on this idea of over-respond. That's not overreact. We're not asking you to run around in a panic. It's over-respond. This idea that too much too soon is better than too little too late. So when you have an incident, call for help, get support, get your teams in place if you have more people that you're working with. There are 4 basic features to any response of any scale for any type of incident. The first bit is to activate. So knowing how to activate your incident management team. And it may be that you as an individual are part of somebody else's incident management team. Your customers might be working with other tour operators. So you need to know how to activate their incident management team and how to get in touch with all your different suppliers. Know who can fill the roles in the incident management team. So if it's just yourself, if you do have 1 or 2 people in your company to help you, or again, what role you're filling in somebody else's incident management team. Then there's the manage bit. So the 3 key bits of information for any kind of response that any organization will want from you is what's happened, what are the key issues for your organization, and what are you going to do about them. And last but not least, ensuring that you record everything that you're doing, because if this incident ends up in court or with legal action, you need to have an accurate record. There are 3 generic functions for any kind of response. If you're a 1-person operation, you do all 3. But again, bear in mind this principle of over-respond. If you can get help from your insurer, from the companies that you're working with, from consultants like we are, bring in that extra help that you need. But basically, these are the three functions that you're going to have to do. Somebody needs to be in charge. You want somebody writing down what you're doing, checking what's in your plans, and you've got somebody that's the link to the incident scene. So the person in charge generally deals with partners. They're talking upwards. Person doing the actions is talking downwards to the incident scene. But it may be there's only one person and you're doing it all yourself. These are the 5 response phases, and this works for any incident. So if you can imagine you've got customers on a transfer coach, coach goes over an embankment, people are injured, and you're informed that some of your customers are on board that coach. So you know what the situation is, coach is going over an embankment, you have a rough idea where it is, doesn't matter how it's happened at this point, you know when it's happened. The next thing you want to do is to start listing out what your concerns are. So how could this get bigger? Where are the people? What are their injuries? Have they been taken to hospital? Are the emergency services on scene? So these are the sort of consequences we're talking about. From that, you can start to derive your actions. So your initial action would be, right, I don't know the answer to some of these things. I need more information. From a list of maybe 10 different actions, you can derive your objectives. Your objectives would be to take your top 2 or 3, and that will get you through this operational period, which is how long you need to go for before you go through that little process again. So in an initial phase, your objective would be identify where my customers are and make sure they are all okay. So that's going to be your primary objective. Later on in the incident, it might be to get support to them, communicate with them, or get their families out to them. That might be your primary thing you've got to do. So a very simple process. Those of you in the US will recognize that that's based on ICS, which is part of your National Incident Management System, but it's a very simplified version of it. But it does work, and it works well for any incident. Teams is a blessing. You can run crisis management on Teams. You don't need a bespoke system like a lot of big companies do. And even big companies now are recognizing that you can do a lot of this on Teams and using basic office functions. And certainly my company's got ways and can show you how to do that, but others do as well. That's it, really. That's all there is to it. It's a very rapid belt through basic incident management, but myself, and I'm sure the other consultants could give you more information on the same thing.
Brilliant.
Adam,
thanks, Andrew.
Back to you.
Thank you so much. So I guess and I know you referenced it a few times in there, but for the majority of kind of owner-operator businesses who are running things for themselves, and I've seen the full version of that with dozens and dozens of boxes on it and hundreds of people. But even the fact of, you have kind of those 3 roles, that can be a kind of quite daunting prospect. So I think you're absolutely right there in terms of ask for help. And I think for the operators that we've got listening, the important thing is to get that sorted now. So don't wait until something happens and think, shit, who am I gonna go and get help from? Sort it out now. And you mentioned insurance there, and that's a key one for me, and certainly a big learning for some of the stuff that I've dealt with over the last 10 years is know what your insurance company can provide. So for your liability insurance and other policies that you've got in place, and the insurance guys, if you were listening yesterday, spoke about, they may be able to provide as part of the policy certain aspects of support that you might need. Some of them might be able to provide PR support, some of them might be able to provide practical on the ground help and support. It's just a question you need to ask them, and it might be the fact that it triggers another level of kind of payment at that time, or whatever the scenario is, but at least find out, at least phone them up and have the conversation. I think the other thing to note from my point of view for solo operators is use the IATDG and use the TourPros community and other tour guiding and tour operating communities that you're part of to kind of form a mini alliance with some of your essentially friends but colleagues who are operating in the same cities and areas that you could potentially call on to support. Because if you've been injured, for example, and you're on your way to hospital, but you've got a bunch of customers that need looking after. If you're your own business and you've got nobody that can go and represent you and go and see them and take care of them until they're, taken on their way or whatever, then again, that's a bad PR mistake, I would say, for you. So, talk to your friends and colleagues in the industry and kind of come up with have a bit of a kind of phone round support group, I would say, because certainly not everyone's going to have that big team. And the other place to reach out to help and advice for is TourPros and IATDG. We can kind of point you in the right direction if ever you need that, and that'll probably be to one of these three or all of these three gentlemen to say, phone these guys. These are the experts. Just listening to that, Mike, Andrew said that was based on the North American system. Would you add anything to that kind of basic outline process that Andrew did a great job of condensing, by the way, because I've seen the full version.
Yeah, I think he did a really good job. The big key with any of them, and you'll probably hear this from Colin, but you got to practice, right? Just having the plan is one thing, but you actually have to get in the room, let people get familiar with it, touch it, feel it, and practice it. And what you'll find is you'll find little kinks. You'll find a phone number that's expired, a contact that's no longer there, or something. And so it's incredibly important on a regular basis to take all that you've put together in these plans, and Andrew gave a great outline, and then practice it. So.
Okay, brilliant. And Colin, is there anything you want to quickly add on that process? You're on mute, Colin. Hang on, let me unmute you.
Sorry, hold on. Yeah, there you go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. For sole traders, I think the issue for them, as everyone's pointed out, you don't have those teams of people to rely on. And insurance, definitely, I would recommend that. I've worked with lots of very small tour operators where they just don't have the resources themselves to deal with a large incident, and they make the use of insurance companies here in the UK who offer crisis management policies, which cover trauma consultancy, flying relatives to and from the scene of an incident, and also PR expenses, so it can save a lot of money. So if you're a small, very small business, then it's definitely worth looking at that to have that protection. And also that support if something goes wrong. As well as that, I guess it's back to Andrew's point about a crisis management plan. Whatever it is, it's got to be suitable to the size and resources of your business. So again, there's no point a tiny little tour operator having something that the wonderful world of TUI or Thomas Cook would have, because it'd be wholly inappropriate. So it needs to be geared to the resources you've got, the number of people you've got available to help you, and any external support that you require. Okay,
brilliant, thank you. So without getting into any gory details or kind of naming and shaming any businesses, but could you give some kind of examples in the recent past of instances that have happened where classic mistakes have been made that have damaged the reputation of the company, or actually the physical, mental well-being of customers?
Well, there's been quite a few.
Go on, Colin.
Should I start?
Yeah, go on.
I think, well, there's a few actually that have been quite high profile. So there's the carbon monoxide poisoning in Corfu, where 2 children died who were traveling with a UK tour operator. And basically that was really very badly handled from the point of view of dealing with the family, in that the business showed no sympathy, they showed no care, they showed no compassion. And whilst they dealt with the incident from a sort of operational and practical point of view, they actually didn't do anything for the emotional, physical support and well-being of the family who were affected. And as a result of that, they got a lot of damaging PR against that organization. And they'd never ever said sorry for what they did, and that's all the family wanted to hear. So in the end, the family sued the pants off them, and they ended up spending, I think, more than £1 million in legal costs and in actually setting up a foundation in the name of the children who were killed. So something as simple as saying sorry, something as simple as showing empathy, care, sympathy, you know, that's where you go. And practical support, giving financial support if necessary, giving things to people to help them to get through any kind of traumatic incident is kind of key. So I think that's a good learning point. So I'll let the other guys talk about some of theirs.
Okay, Mike, what about yourself?
Well, I know one that just popped to mind right away is there was a tour operator in Hawaii or whatever, and they had an incident with some of their participants, and they did have casualties in that incident. And I think to what Colin said, it's the same kind of thing. Instead of being empathetic and really acknowledging that the situation happened, we're aware of it, we're on it, we're going to get involved, and we're going to do everything we can to support everybody involved to get to the true answer. Because at the initial onset of a crisis, what you first hear never turns out to be the whole story. I mean, there's so many pieces and parts that you learn along the way in that journey. But to let people know that I'm there, I'm present, and our thoughts and prayers, or however you want to say it, go out to those people involved. But we, this organization, are committed to being involved, support everybody involved, and help get to the true cause of it to make sure it never happens again. And instead, in that particular incident, it was more finger pointing. It was operators pointing to subcontractors and so forth. And that just blew it up in the news, right? It just became so much bigger than it probably would have, because you had this other drama going on the sideline instead of focusing on the incident itself, getting to the root cause analysis and figuring out, you know, what happened, and how can we make sure it doesn't happen again, you know? So, and again, that empathy and supporting people, you hear what Colin said so many times, that these issues that turn into a lawsuit. I'm a president of Depart Smart, which is a mother whose son died on a program in 2007. And really all she was looking for is somebody to acknowledge that incident and to apologize, right? And of course, in this legal litigious world we live in, nobody wants to say too much from a corporate standpoint. And that's where I try to separate from that, because I'm not an attorney, don't play one on TV or anything else. But what's most important is that family. We'll sort it out, the legal issues later, we'll sort out the financial issues later. But right now we're going to be present, and we're going to respond, and we're going to support those people involved in this. And I tell you, if you do that effectively, it will materialize at the end result. There will be people maybe that do not file a lawsuit, or when they do, it's not vindictive. It's for a purpose, right? Medical treatments and various other things. So I highly support that. Just, you know, be empathetic, stand up, acknowledge that it happened, and then that commitment that we're going to be present, we're going to be involved, and we're going to help get to the solution.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And Andrew, anything to add in terms of some classic errors that you might have seen?
Well, rather than errors, again, just to provide support really to smaller operators, I do a lot of work with a company called the Centre for Crisis Psychology, and CCP offer counsellors which will go out and help the travel industry. So I've been involved in a number of incidents, tragic ones, both small scale where children have died in swimming accidents, and larger scale things, for example, like the terrorist attack in Barcelona, where obviously I was working with TUI at the time, but we were able to fly out CCP. So we had our own care teams. Small operators won't have that, but you can go to professionals like CCP. Their professional people will go out, and they offer something that's called trauma first aid. Now, again, within TUI, we trained up operators to do that, but there's no reason why a sole operator can't get trained themselves. And it's all these things about empathy, about showing care, a bit of compassion to people that have been involved, and helping them through that situation, and acting as a conduit for other care services and other support. And that's all you can do. You're not a professional counsellor, but you can provide them with this extra support, help them through all the admin about extending their stay, maybe bringing relatives out, all that kind of thing. But a small company like that, CCP, can be of enormous support to smaller operators as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I'd kind of endorse CCP as well from previous experience. Mike, in the US, is there a similar based organisation? So with a team of crisis counsellors that are kind of on hand.
I do. I'm not going to show slides, but and I won't go into all the detail just because Andrew did a good job, and I think Colin would do the same. But I guess more than anything, just I want to talk about this situation, and I own Travel Safety Solutions, which we provide crisis management, planning, and preparation for tour operators. We also go in and help them establish the policies, procedures, and so forth and training that will reduce the probability of unwanted events coming up on programs and all that. So, and we do work with national and international organizations. So anyway, this one's a weird one, the one we're in, the COVID-19, and how to track it and follow it, how to develop a plan for it. Even a good crisis plan has a kind of a shelf life, and at some point you're breaking down the command center, and in this case getting laid off or going back to what's left of your job and your business. But it's rather unprecedented, right? I mean, we've been through pandemics before, and H1N1's a great example. I spent a lot of time in China during that one, working with the government officials there, but it's hard to figure out exactly why this one has escalated to the scale that it has. And I'm guessing somewhat, at least in the United States, has to be related to the presidential race and so forth. The good news is the vaccine has been accelerated, I think, in H1N1. If you remember, it started in January. A year and a half later, 18 months later, we had a vaccine out, and the pandemic was actually removed. The label pandemic was removed in July of that. So that was 2009. So in July of 2010, pandemic was lifted and the whole world opened up. Now, what was different is we traveled people very effectively. We were able to be flexible and adjust and get ready. And I know I traveled thousands to China and didn't have one single reported case. So I guess how that relates to this is there's some pent up energy or demand for travel. And I think this is the time that operators need to be focused internally on what your offering is going to be, because people are going to want a smorgasbord. And actually, I'm going to come back a step and say, first of all, the tour operators got to get their frame of mind in the right spot. If you're the tour operator and you're huddled up at home and Walmart's delivering your groceries to your house because you're afraid to go out, you may not have the mindset to set up a good program that's going to attract, clientele. If you're out there, you learn how to maneuver in this new culture and environment and effectively maneuver and understand it. It's not rocket science to figure out what you need to offer on programs and sanitizers. Give people the option if they want spacing on buses, fine. It just takes 2 buses instead of 1, and we can make that available for you. Insurance is incredibly important, to give them options on insurance and so that they have an effective way out. And everybody I know in the US now, everything has a waiver, a cancel for free or whatever. And so those are pretty basic options. But what you have to do is be able to go out and say to the people, I'm ready when you're ready. And I've said that from the start of this. Our marketing has to be, we're ready. Here's what we offer. Here's our suite of avenues that you can best protect your client and give them all the choices they want, because people have different levels of comfort involving how you're going to react in this world and socialize in this new world. So this right now is the absolute perfect time to be building those policies, building those procedures, practicing them, spreading them through your organization, training all the way out to every single tour director or tour guide that you have in your organization or use, so that when that person calls, you're ready to make them an offering. And again, flexibility is going to be incredibly important. And so I was going to say, you know, I know another organization I've worked with has developed a certification program for student tour operators. And what's unique about that program, we wrote the standards, they're out there, and organizations are involved in the certification program. Some have been certified so far. What's unique about that, it's actually the Certified Student Tour Operator certification. Any organization, you don't have to be a member of that particular association. You can go through this program. And literally, I know I wrote a guide how to do every single one, how to build your crisis response plan step by step, how to build a medical plan to properly gather, you know, information appropriate to send somebody out with a high comfort level that you can accommodate them and make sure that the chance of problems with them is minimal. So I encourage anybody, if you don't know what to do, there's a free method virtually sitting there waiting in any organization. They don't have to be a member of, it's the Student Youth Travel Association. You don't have to be a member of them. They have to make it open to all tour organizations, or that program could never be accredited, which is the end game on that. So if you don't have a roadmap, there is a roadmap. There are resources that can help your organization get ready. And I'll tell you, those policies and procedures will help you respond to situations just as this.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. You mentioned prevention there, and Colin, what are some simple steps that small operators can take to prevent incidents in the first place? So taking COVID aside, because that's in terms of prevention, probably a bit of a minefield, and like Mike said, a lot of people know, you know, the kind of protocols now because we're all living it within our daily lives. But just in terms of the other main risks, if you're operating, you know, a walking tour in the city that maybe encompasses food or even, you know, or a vehicle or some kind of activity, how do you go about preventing some of those key risks? Because we don't want to forget, you know, about those key risks with COVID. Everyone's focused on COVID, but actually the bigger risk is everything else as well.
Yeah, no, it's true actually. And I think any business, however big or small you are, I think what you've got to have is your safety management system, which is kind of underpins your crisis management plan. So that's basically having your sort of legal due diligence policies and procedures in place. So any supplier you're using, do you check them to make sure that they're a reputable supplier, that they're delivering good practice safety? Do you carry out some form of assessment on them? I work with lots and lots of tour operators within Europe, actually, not just in the UK, who risk assess their accommodation providers, their transport providers, their high risk activity providers. And they have some then legal due diligence that they've carried out some checks. They haven't simply contracted with somebody because they've got the best price, because actually you can't defend yourself in a court of law with that comment. You can only, oops, sorry.
All right.
If you've done some due diligence, then you know you're using good suppliers who will have safety at front of mind, and B, you've got something with which to help defend any litigation, any claim, and also it's a way of minimizing the risk of any incident happening. But I'll give you a specific issue, because you've got a lot of tour guides who are sole individual people, self-employed, and actually I've recently been asked, although we risk assess lots of things for tour operators, we never actually risk assess a self-employed tour guide. And we've had in an incident where the tour guide has been the one who's subject to the legal action because they acted inappropriately with some client during a tour. So what the tour operator wants to know is, how can you prevent that? How can you risk assess a tour guide? So I guess my question to all of you and the tour guides who are here is, how can you prove to a tour operator that you're a responsible, sort of qualified, accredited tour professional, and that you're going to follow a code of practice or whatever it is that you're going to do, and you can display that to anybody who's going to employ you? And I think that would be a good way forward.
That's a great question, and obviously the obvious answer is to join an association like ours, and then, you know, everyone knows you're legit.
Are you
but no.
are you checking them out though, Adam? You've got to. Are you assessing them?
But actually, it's a great question, I guess, proving your own suitability. And I guess, and so how would you expect a tour guide to prove their own suitability? Would it be from previous good reputation in the industry, previous reviews, feedback, and would that help a legal case?
Yes, I would think it would. And also, if they're working with children or a youth market or under 18s, then have they had some sort of police checks or whatever it is required in each country? So that would say yes, you're safe to guide children around without their parents being there. So all those things help. So anything that a tour professional guide can achieve to show their qualifications and their status and their suitability would definitely help.
Yeah, I think the other, to make sure you're right, background check is very important, but also making sure that you're getting feedback from the programs real time and that there's a formal process to review that feedback. And at a senior level, sitting down, going through the feedback, and then making action plans to make corrections, because the public doesn't lie. If a tour guide is acting inappropriately with some of the participants of the group, it'll come out. It'll be disclosed in this information, and it gives you the ability then to take action. And at least if you are sitting in a court of law, you can say, I did those things that were possible for me, like a pre-employment background check, and then update that every so many years. And then we look at the feedback, what's going on every single program at a senior level. And then we take actions, and here's records of all those actions over the last couple of years. So that makes it pretty defensible,
I think that's a great point. Just generally about the records, and even if you're a solo operator, whatever actions you take, you've got to document them, right? Because all these steps you're taking, you're doing them to protect the customers and the tour, but actually also you're building a defense. You're building a defense case in the worst case scenario. So you're building up that if the worst happens, you can just take it off the shelf or out of your cloud and just go, these are all the actions I've taken, this is the dates that I've done stuff.
And you're minimizing the risk as well for the customers.
Yes.
That's at the heart of that process, Adam, as well. It's the idea that you've looked at a situation, there's a logical thought process. So you've identified what the potential consequences are. You've got a rationale then for your actions, and you've got a rationale as to why you've picked the key things that you're going to do. You might be wrong, you might get it wrong, but at least you've got a logical thought process, which if you go into an inquiry, you can demonstrate what you were thinking and why you were thinking it. Writing everything down, keeping the documentation, that's what's important.
Yeah, and that doesn't have to be, if you're a small operator, that doesn't have to be some huge, laborious, complicated process. And I'm sure all you guys can, probably help small operators, create
just a big diary.
Right. Okay. Simple as that, I guess. Yeah. Cool. A quick question. I had a question from Deborah in the chat. How do you deal with the situation as a small operator? Your guest go on a cruise ship, gets COVID, had to be hospitalized in one of the ports of call, and then they are hospitalized or die, and then the family holds you responsible for not getting the guests back to their home. So do you mean, Deborah, that they're not responsible for not getting them back home after they passed away, or kind of when they were sick? If you can write that in the chat before. Okay. What do you think about that, gents? Do you think that's a reasonable worry that Deborah has, or actually would the cruise ship assume responsibility for that?
To me, go ahead. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, no. The cruise ship may accept responsibility. Well, they would have to. The cruise ship, it depends where it happens. There's all sorts of fun and games with international laws about when it happens and the nationality of the persons and everything else. But there is undoubtedly a liability on the cruise ship with port health regulations. So if they can demonstrate, this is COVID, it's slightly different, but it's an infectious disease. So if they can demonstrate, the cruise ship hasn't gone through its cleaning procedures and everything else, but that's highly regulated in the cruise ship industry. and they know the dangers of litigation around that. So they've normally, as you've probably seen already with the COVID cases, where people have accused the cruise industry, they've got it pretty well documented what they did. Some of them are in a dodgy place just now because they knew there was an infectious disease around and they still sailed when they probably shouldn't have. But yeah, most of them, it is the cruise ship that's liable.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. I know for Andrew and Colin, it's kind of 7 o'clock on a Friday evening, so you'll be wanting to get your bottle of wine opened or back to your bottle of wine, whichever one it was.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate that. And Mike, thanks very much for your time as well. We're going to share this recording, and we'll make sure we share your details with everybody in our group and all our members. So appreciate that. Thank you very much.
That was great, Adam.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, guys. Appreciate that.
Bye.
Thanks, folks.